Chair lays out on second reading House Bill 121. The clerk will read the bill.
HB number 121 by King, relating to measures for ensuring public school safety, including the commissioning of peace officers by the Texas Education Agency, public school safety and security requirements, and the provision of safety-related resources.
Chair recognizes Mr. King to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. During the 88th legislative session, the legislature passed House Bill 3 to enhance school safety and security across the state. Following its implementation, several areas of improvement were identified, and House Bill 121 seeks to address those concerns. First of all, it expands the definition of peace officers to include private school peace officers, fire marshals, and permanent peace officer licenses, Alamo complex officers, and TEA peace officers. Allowing school districts a good cause exception to the armed security officer requirement to apply for up to 5 years with an option to reapply. It permits TEA to employ peace officers specifically to enforce rules related to the protections of buildings and grounds. This ensures TEA has staff knowledgeable in law enforcement that can act as reliable points of contact, improving coordination between schools and law enforcement. It ensures district's multi-hazard emergency plan includes provisions for safety of students during extracurricular activities, and it requires the TEA to report to the legislature with recommendations and potential corrective actions. I do believe there is an amendment.
The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Luther.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luther to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment would modify the Texas Family Code to require that all reports of abuse or misconduct, including sexual misconduct by an educator, are reported to law enforcement. Currently, Chapter 22 of the Texas Education Code requires that reports of abuse and misconduct by school employees is reported in the same manner as abuse under Chapter 261 of the Texas Family Code. The issue is that that provision of the code allows for abuse and misconduct to be reported to state and local law enforcement, the Department of Family and Protective Services, or a state agency that operates, licenses, certifies, or registers the facility where the abuse occurred. Unfortunately, several school districts have taken advantage of the use of the word "or" in that statute, and reports of misconduct involving educators is being reported solely to the State Board of Educator Certification and not to the police. This amendment would make it so any report of abuse, including sexual abuse, must be reported to law enforcement. We owe a duty to protect our kids, and we have laws to protect them from sexual predators. We should not have a system that allows for pedophiles to avoid jail time for horrific crimes.
Good one. For what purpose?
I just would like to ask a question.
Does gentlelady yield for questions?
I do.
Gentlelady yields for questions.
All right, I apologize. I was going to ask a question on the main bill, and so I haven't had a chance to look at your amendment to the bill. It sounds like right now in code it requires the school district to report sexual abuse to TEA, but not to law enforcement, and so your amendment would simply say you also have to report it to law enforcement?
Yes, right now it gives it to the TEA or law enforcement, and it just changes it to where both are notified.
So in current law, does TEA not have to report to law enforcement?
It is not always reported.
Okay. So just what brought about this particular amendment?
Well, it's actually a bill that I filed, and when I saw Mr. King's bill, it fits perfectly into his bill.
Okay, I appreciate you answering the question.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Chasline, for what purpose?
would the gentlelady yield for some questions?
Does the gentlelady yield for questions?
Yes.
The gentlelady yields for questions.
All right, Representative Luther, how many complaints of teacher misconduct have been filed with the TEA?
Between 2019 and 2023, the numbers have doubled from 1,265 to 2,295. The number has increased so much that the TEA is requesting an extra 17 million just to handle the growing volume. All these cases are not being reported to law enforcement.
Wow. So what are some of the offenses that are included in these complaints?
It includes everything from simple violence to sexual misconduct between a teacher and a student. For example, according to openrecords.org, Dallas alone has 115 reports of teachers engaging in sexual misconduct with students. None of them were reported to law enforcement, and 112 of those educators returned to classrooms.
And why is this needed if we've been seeing massive amounts of news coverage of teachers who have been arrested and fired?
Those cases are most often because the parents of the child found out and reported to law enforcement directly, or to be more direct, because the school didn't have a choice in the matter.
Well, I love this amendment. I can't wait to vote yes, and I would encourage all my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you.
Mr. Leach, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentlelady yield for
The
questions?
gentlelady for questions.
I will.
She yields.
Thank you, Representative Luther. I love the intent of your amendment. This is necessary, and I laud you for bringing it. I want to clarify. So your amendment would require a report to be made to, is it just a local law enforcement agency? Which agency is it?
It would be local law enforcement, yes.
Okay, so in the instance of, let's say, Dallas ISD, which you just referenced, so if something happens at a Dallas ISD school, the report would be made to would it be the Dallas Police Department?
The amendment actually states it would be made to a local or state law enforcement agency.
Okay, one of the concerns I have, and my question is going to be, are you willing to work with me on this, is, again, I laud the intent of your amendment. One of the concerns that we've heard in testimony in the Public Education Committee is that in some instances, in fact, in many instances, especially in bigger school districts, the reports are made to the school district's police department, which is a major problem when you are reporting internally within an organization. And so would you be willing to work with me on an amendment to require those reports to be made to it can be made to the school's police department, but also to the local police department?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'd like to work with you on an amendment to your amendment. I'll come on down.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Again, for what purpose?
Does the gentlelady yield?
Does the gentlelady yield for questions?
I do.
She yields.
Ms. Luther, you were a former teacher, is that correct?
I taught public high school for 13 years.
Right. And this bill, this amendment to this bill is not intended to harm or hurt good teachers that are out there working hard to educate our students, correct?
Absolutely not. I'm a huge fan of our teachers in Texas.
Right. And this bill is just to strengthen those that are there. And look, there's a small percentage of people in lots of businesses that do bad things. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And this is just to make sure that our children, which are most precious to everyone, are protected from that small percentage of things that happen poorly. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Little, for what purpose?
The gentlelady yield for questions.
Gentlelady yield for questions?
I do.
She yields.
Representative Luther, this is a wonderful amendment. Thank you for bringing it. What types of situations gave rise to your concern about the need for this amendment?
As a former teacher, I have seen with my own eyes where teachers were laid off and then went and worked for another school.
Are you concerned at all that information about abuse or harm to children inside of schools is not making it outside the walls of that agency to someone who can do something about it?
It's possible that that can happen, and we need to close that door.
And my understanding is it's a requirement that schools that are aware of abuse of a student are required to report that information to TEA. Is that right?
Well, even as a former teacher, I was not exactly sure who to report suspected abuse to. And so I felt that if I just went to an authority person in the school, that was enough. And it's actually just not enough.
But is the thrust of your amendment to make sure that everyone who works at a school is clear about to whom to report abuse, and it's designed to protect children from that type of conduct?
Any case of abuse, especially in schools, must be made public and sent to law enforcement.
Well, thank you, Representative Luther.
Thank you.
Oh, please.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Bowers, for what purpose?
will the gentlelady yield for some questions?
This gentleman yield for questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Shields.
In your amendment, do you define abuse? So if a student cuss at a kid, is that considered an abuse?
That is not in the amendment, no.
So you don't define what abuse is. So it's at the discretion of that teacher?
Well, at that point, it could be at the discretion of the police department. If they don't think that that's abuse, then they would probably not prosecute.
Is that in your amendment?
I can't hear. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, ma'am.
Is that in your amendment? Well, you know, and the reason I ask these questions, Representative, is that we want to make sure, no doubt, we want to protect our teachers. I think we're all in on that. But we want to make sure that it is not for every little infraction, because we want to give our districts some latitude to be able to
Yes, ma'am.
to ensure both parties are protected.
Yes, ma'am. It's in the penal code already that we're not changing what abuse is.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering my question.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
The lady's time has expired. Ms. Collier, for what purpose?
Move to extend the time.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? Chair is none so ordered. Ms. Collier, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield for questions?
Generally yield for questions?
Yes.
She yields for questions.
I really appreciate this, you bringing this to our attention. I want to make sure, Representative, is this an action that would be taken by teachers or anyone in the school district?
The person that is reporting needs to, like, as a teacher, I need to call law enforcement and notify the school.
Okay, so then this would be, so if a teacher suspects abuse or neglect for one of the students, under your bill, in addition to notifying TEA, the teacher would be required to notify Department of State Health
So
and
it actually,
law enforcement?
so it says they must make the report to both the Department of Family and Protective
Yes.
Services and a local or state law enforcement agency if the report is based on evidence that a person engaged in misconduct described by Section 22.093, which is already in the code.
Okay, so if a teacher suspects, I'll just go with teachers, if they suspect that the student is subjected to abuse, then they would be required to notify TEA, or I guess the school, but also DFPS, so they would file a report with DFPS and with the local law enforcement, whether that's the sheriff or the city police or
Yes.
the state police.
Yes.
Okay, and then in terms of clarifying based on evidence, if the report is based on evidence, what does that mean? Can you just clarify?
Well, that would be up to the people that are already best at that job, which would be the Family and Protective Services along with the police. But any type, as a teacher, if there's any type of abuse that I think is happening in the household or outside, it's out of my hands. Once I report it, it's up to those authorities to take action on that.
Okay, so in terms of, can you give me an example of some things that you as a teacher would suspect as being neglect or abuse that you would be required to report?
So it's defined in the penal code. Drug trafficking. If a child comes and has bruising on them that they can't explain, things like that.
Okay, and then in terms of neglect, if they come hungry all the time, is that neglect?
It could be. I can't, it would be an individual case-by-case basis. So,
Okay. And so then the teacher would be, sorry. Did you want to say something?
no, go ahead.
Okay. So the teacher would be required to file that report with DFPS and with the local law enforcement or state police.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. But I move adoption and request a record vote, please.
The following amendment to the amendment, the clerk will read the amendment to the amendment by Mr. Toth.
Amendment by Toth.
Chair recognizes Mr. Toth to explain the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It was about 2 years ago, I got a call from a very close friend on a Saturday afternoon, and I saw her on speed dial, and I knew who it was, and I said, hey, what's up? And the only thing I heard was sobbing for the better part of 2 minutes as she went on to explain how her child had been sexually assaulted. And as we walked over the next 6 months with this family, only to find out that this teacher that assaulted her child had been passed from school district to school district to school district to school district. Every adult in the state of Texas is a mandatory reporter, but unfortunately, all too often in education, they're not making those reports as they should. It's getting reported to the TEA, but it's never making it to the district attorney's office. There needs to be redundancy in the reporting process that calls for the person that is aware of the misdeed to not only report it to the DA, but to report it as well in an executive session setting to trustees of the school board, who are then also responsible for making sure that this is reported to law enforcement. And that's what my amendment does. Ms. Sweener?
Purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Gentleman, he yields.
Representative Toth, thank you for walking us through this amendment, or your amendment to the amendment. As you know, we all get cautious when we get surprises on the floor. I believe looking at the amendment and your amendment to the amendment, I understand what you're doing with parts 1 and 3 of your amendment. I don't entirely understand part 2. Can you explain to me how that's not duplicative of Rep. Luther's subsection D, which is on page 2 at line 7?
This is the way Ledge Council asked me to instruct to place it in the code.
But what I'm trying to understand is I see Rep. Luther already has very similar language, and I'm trying to figure out if that's duplicative or if you're affecting different things.
This is the way Ledge Council instructed us to place what I just described to you in the code.
With all due respect, Rep. Toth, that's not what I'm trying to understand.
Okay, where are you? What lines are you on? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I am looking at your amendment, lines 6 through 12.
Okay.
That language is close to identical to the language that Rep. Luther has in her amendment on page 2, lines 7 through 13.
Right.
You're requiring notification for the same offenses. The only sort of substantive difference I'm seeing is that there's board authority to report. I guess maybe I'm just answering my question. So this is covering board authority to report, or board obligation to report. Is that? Yeah,
Representative, so Ms. Luther's requires an employee. We're asking for a backup where it also includes a board member to report to law enforcement.
Okay. Okay.
It's a bit redundant, but that's the problem right now, is that these people are falling through the cracks only to arrive at another school where they hurt somebody else.
Okay.
Move adoption.
Thank you for clarifying.
Ms. Collier, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
Mr. Speaker, we're going to work with the bill's author on a third reading amendment, and so I'll pull this down.
The Toth Amendment and the Luther Amendments have been withdrawn. Does anyone wish to speak on, for, or against House Bill 121? Ms. Goodwin, for what purpose?
I wanted to ask the bill author questions. Has he closed on the bill?
So right now we're finding out if anyone wants to speak on, for, or against, then I'll recognize him to close, and then you can ask him questions. Does anybody wish to speak on, for, or against House Bill 21? Chair recognizes Mr. King to close on his bill. Ms. Goodwin, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for some questions?
Does the gentleman yield for some questions?
I yield.
He yields.
Thank you, Chairman King. So this is a school safety bill. Does it address having a safety buffer zone which would stipulate that people can't possess a firearm on or near a school campus?
Well, there's already laws against that other than personnel that this bill speaks to that can possess a firearm.
Right, I understand that there are certain personnel that can possess a firearm, but are you aware that we had an incident in Austin where there was a man openly carrying a rifle near 3 different schools last year, and we were told that there is no law that keeps him from doing it except for federal law, but unfortunately, since it's not a state law, local law enforcement couldn't approach him.
That's not what this bill addresses. So I would not be able to speak to that.
Doesn't it address school safety?
It does address school safety.
I mean, somebody near a school openly carrying a firearm, I would think, is a part of school safety.
I understand that's what you think. That's not what this bill does.
Your bill also addresses personnel being on a school campus armed, and it stipulates that they can get certified within 180 days of being allowed to come on campus armed. That seems very concerning. Can you explain to me the rationale for that?
Certainly. The 180 days comes, the training is set out by TCO. We have somewhat of a shortage of trainers, and we have a shortage of trainers of the trainer. That particular language was asked for specifically by Northside ISD because right now we're requiring them to do it, and they can't meet the obligation set up by the state because it takes longer to get trained than what the current statute says. So this bill is giving them a 180-day grace period to complete that training.
But they can get a variance if they can't meet the requirements. I just feel
Some
like
school
it's
districts don't want to. Some school districts, and it's very clear, you can apply for an exemption and you can reapply after 5 years if your school district doesn't want to comply with this. Some school districts are trying to get the training, they want to get the training, and they're put in a box because of the shortage of trainers.
Doesn't your committee substitute change it from 5 years to 1 year?
No.
Is that,
It's got a 5-year variance in it. Yeah, that's what it does. So, I mean,
so
a
your
school
committee
district
substitute does change something that was 5 years to 1 year. What is that?
You're going to have to get more specific, Representative. I'm just telling you what House Bill 121 seeks to do.
Okay. So there can be a situation where there are armed personnel on a school campus who have not completed the school safety training, and they have another 180 days to do so.
Training would start for a hired employee on day one. They have to start training on day one. So they're in training while they're working as a security officer.
But they are carrying a gun on a school campus while they are getting trained about how to handle a school shooting situation.
They would be allowed to carry a gun under this bill while they're completing training.
That seems very irresponsible to me. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. Move passage.
The question occurs to passage to engrossment of House Bill 121. A record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. King of Hemp Hill voting aye. Mr. Canales voting nay. Mr. McQueenie voting aye. Mr. Alverson voting aye. Have all members voted? Ms. Luther voting aye. Mr. Alders voting aye. Ms. Leo Wilson voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 93 ayes and 52 nays, House Bill 121 is passed to engrossment. Chair lays out House Bill 18 as a matter of